Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Vital Conversations, Dialogues on Living and Dying Well. I'm your host, Kim Adams, and happy to be here today. We have a wonderful guest, and usually our conversations around end of life and death and dying, and today we get to add in conscious grieving and the afterlife. So we're in for a real treat. For those of you that are returning, welcome back. Happy to see you, and as you know, we have the opportunity to connect with one another and engage via the chat, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. So go ahead now and just type in and let us know where you're listening in from. And that will be your way to ask questions and post comments during our time together today. In addition to being the host of this educational forum, which I like to say, I'm also an end-of-life guide and support people to really plan, as I like to say, to author the last chapter of their life. Regardless of age or health status, important now to begin those conversations about what you want and what's important to you. I know for me, when I'm not able to speak, I want to make sure that people know what it is that I would want. And I would think that that would be what the rest of most people would want. So definitely engage with me for those types of conversations, and I'll talk more at the end about that in our next webinar. And so other than that, in addition, I'm also a hospice volunteer and spent many years working in that arena. So great to see a number of you already beginning to type in the chat. That is great. If for some reason you have any audio or video issues, 9 times out of 10, just refresh your browser. And I also think at the bottom of the screen, there's a little link that says, refresh. If you continue to have problems, I put a little note, a sticky note in the chat where you can go to the YouTube link where this is being broadcast live. So there's many ways to be able to see us. So excellent. Look at Dawn from Connecticut, and we have Lori from California, and we have Dorothy from Florida, Cynthia from Arizona, Alexandra from Canada, from Toronto, Robin from Denver. So this is great, and we truly are an international group, and I'm just so loving to see everyone type in and be present. As you know, you get the video recording, so for those of you that I know it's the middle of the day for some of you, that no worries, you'll be getting the full replay exactly as you would be seeing it live. So I think that's our housekeeping. Let me get started by properly introducing our guest today, Terri Daniel. So Terri is an interfaith minister, a clinical chaplain, and a certified thanatologist, death education, who assists dying and grieving individuals to discover a more spiritually spacious understanding of death and beyond. Her unique perspective on birth, death, and the journey of the soul helps the dying and the living find meaning and healing through meditative and ritual practices that open a conduit to other dimensions. Her unique form of radical mysticism incorporates elements of Buddhism, shamanism, ancient pagan practices, Gnostic Christianity, and other spiritual traditions to break down limiting beliefs about forgiveness, divine judgment, and negative experience. Terri's the author of 3 books on death and the afterlife: A Swan in Heaven, Conversations Between Two Worlds; Embracing Death, A New Look at Grief, Gratitude, and God; and her 3rd book is Turning the Corner on Grief Street: How Trauma and Loss Can Transform Us. Terri is also the founder and president of the Afterlife Education Foundation and producer of the annual Afterlife Awareness Conference, which we'll be talking a lot about today and strongly encouraging all of you to check it out. So without further ado, I want to welcome Terri. Terri, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much.
This is great. This is
We both have beautiful pictures on the walls behind our heads, I see.
We do. Yes, this is great. Well, already we have tremendous number of people that are listening in already, and more will continue to join us as we go through. So, I thought we could just kind of get started and just talk a little bit about, your story. As our friend Patty Burgess of the Death Chick says, we just don't wake up one morning and say, I'm just going to do this death work or this end of life work. So tell us a little bit about your story.
That is very true. Well, I was always spiritual, so to speak. I was a pretty mystical kid. And so none of this was really new to me as I got older. when I was about 48, my son, who was 10 years old, was diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, very rare disorder for which there was no medical intervention. And I was told he would have 5 to 10 years to live, and that he would progressively degenerate, lose his ability to walk, talk, manage his bodily functions, and then eventually he would die. And when I got this news, along with the other expected responses of, sadness and shock and everything else, I also, my spiritual side kicked in and said, I wonder what this means. I wonder why. And it's not like, why did this happen to me? It's like, very interesting. I wonder what this means. And I thought, what am I supposed to do? Should I take him all over the world and go to China and Brazil and find faith healers and try to stop this? Or should I just go with it because there's a reason for it? And I realized that believing in reincarnation, that just because I was the mother and he was the child didn't mean I had more wisdom than he does. And I decided to listen to his soul. And his soul obviously created this for some reason. Long story short, this is the reason, so that I could be sitting here with you right now having this conversation. It was all inspired by that.
Wow. So Danny, as you said, was a teacher for you.
Absolutely. He was a teacher for a lot of people. And, one of the things I learned by having the experience of having a sick child, a dying child, is that anyone who encounters us, even if it's someone just walking past us at the grocery store, when I'm pushing this severely disabled child in a wheelchair, everybody experiences him as a teacher in some way or another.
Wow.
Disabled and seriously ill people, especially children, because we're all connected, we're all teachers and students for each other. So, but people like Danny, even more so, because he's a child, because his condition was so sad, and people have to face their own mortality and their own vulnerability when they look at a child like that. So that's at the very least the level that he was a teacher, and it goes up from there.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, that was one of the things that we learned in a coaching program that I took, was that everyone we meet is our teacher and a student. And so we tend to, though, think, well, kids are, the adults are the ones teaching, but in some ways, as you found out. So what did Danny teach you?
Well, God, I could write books about that, and I have.
Yes.
Well, he certainly taught me about death and, what it's like to see someone die and experience loss and caregiving and everything that goes with that. He started communicating with me 30 minutes after he died. So he taught me that after-death communication is possible, and that there are other dimensions on which we can and do exist simultaneously with this one, and that communication is possible between those dimensions. There's so many direct and indirect ways that he taught me things. He, I feel, is completely kind of controlling the things that I do, like the man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. I would have never thought in a million years that I would end up going to college at 56 and getting a degree in theology. And next year I start my doctorate in ministry. And if you had said to me at any point in my life, oh, you're going to be Dr. Daniel, a doctorate in ministry, it would have just seemed ludicrous, especially since my last name wasn't Daniel. Obviously, my son's name was Danny. It wasn't Danny Daniel. But after he died, I had my last name changed to his first name. So another thing he taught me is the importance of ritual symbolism, doing things like changing your name, and then all the rituals and things that we practice in our grief workshop and in all the death practices that we're involved in.
Great. Wow. There's so much here. I mean, your experience with Danny, all that he taught you, you now being, a chaplain, like you said, going back to school and soon to be working on your doctorate, just is unbelievable. So one of the pieces, actually kind of the twofold, is the conscious dying piece or conscious grieving piece, and kind of the afterlife. And so let's just talk a little bit about the conscious grieving. And what do you mean when you use that term?
Well, in our culture, because death is so in the closet and so denied and dismissed, grief goes right along with it. So I'm not talking about the way most people talk about grief is like, oh, no one understands and you only get 3 days off from work for bereavement, and people say silly euphemistic platitudes. That's all true, but I try to take it a little bit deeper than that and help people see that we are co-creators of our experience. So our losses and our traumatic experiences have hidden meaning in them, have a purpose in which we are involved. And conscious grieving means to look at your grief experience as a co-created piece. That, okay, something terrible happened, your child was kidnapped and murdered. I'm trying to think of the worst possible thing. And as you go through the grief process, of course you're angry, of course you're looking for blame, of course you feel victimized. But in the process of healing, to really go forward in healing, you have to look underneath all those things and shift some of those perceptions. If your child is kidnapped and murdered, yes, you are victimized. There's no question about it. But at some point, if you are able to expand your spiritual understanding of what happens in earthly experience, you can actually see the perpetrator of that crime and you and your child and the paramedics on the scene and everyone in the family and everyone in the murderer's family as being all connected and meeting up at this intersection where this thing happened. That affects everybody. And the way I explained that is, and this was given to me interdimensionally from my guides, is that we're all operating like pieces in a kaleidoscope. And the pieces look like they're separate, but they're all contained in a container. And so when one piece does something, all the other pieces do it too. In fact, they can't do anything independently. So your biggest enemy is that piece right next to you in the kaleidoscope. We all move together. And to be able to see that really helps let go of our fierce desire to keep the world the way it was before the grief event happened, to want to go back to normal. It helps us let go of that and move on to what is going to be next in our reality.
Wow. Such a huge shift, right? From how things used to be.
Yes.
How does, I put this in the registration form, in terms of how faith plays into this. Theological overhaul is a word that I love that you use. How does this play into, as you're describing this kaleidoscope and being able to shift our perceptions?
Well, because not everybody sees the universe as working that way in this kaleidoscopic view. So many people that I encounter as a chaplain or in my workshops still have these assumptions of how the world works. And by the way, the best book I would recommend to anybody is a book called Shattered Assumptions by Ronnie Janoff Bullman. And the assumptions are things like this: children shouldn't die before their parents. Marriage should last forever. You are a good person and God loves you. Or we are rewarded for goodness and punished for badness. Most of us figure out by the time we're 25 that the world doesn't really work that way, but we hold on to that. And so you're always hearing people say, well, my marriage wasn't supposed to end, or my child wasn't supposed to die. So we lose our assumptions. And some of the most powerful assumptions are the ones we have about what God is and how God works. And so when a traumatic experience or a loss shakes us loose from that, people don't know what to do. They're paralyzed, or they have, what is known as a crisis of faith. And in the conscious grieving teaching, what we're trying to do is to help people go through that crisis of faith and replace those old assumptions with new ideas. So I have had people say things to me like, one woman who had 4 children die in 4 separate unrelated events over a 25-year period, said to me, I thought if I was a good person and did everything to please God, I would be protected from something like this. And so my question to her is, why did you think that? Where did you learn that idea? Somebody told you that the world works that way. And now you know that it doesn't. So how can we reconstruct everything from the ground up? That's the theological overhaul, so that you can find peace with this, because that question will haunt you forever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned, and I've heard you speak before, a book, Stages of Faith.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, where when we're still holding on to something that from when we're young,
Yes.
Sunday school teachings of who God is and punishment and kind of heaven and hell and all those pieces.
Yeah. Well, Stages of Faith is a wonderful piece of research by a guy named James Fowler, and I apologize, my answering machine's going off.
Okay, no problem.
So just try to ignore it. Where he studied how people move through faith or spiritual awareness. So when you're a child in Sunday school, you believe that there's a man in the sky who waves a magic wand and things happen, and heaven in the streets paved with gold and all that stuff. And then as you grow up, you evolve in your understanding a little bit and move to, perhaps if you start to question, now you're going through adolescence and teenagehood and young adulthood, and you move through these stages. But some people don't move through the stages, and many of them stay at the stage that's right about adolescence, which is the God in the sky and the punishment and the heaven. Can you hear that in the background? I'm really sorry. It's very distracting.
That's okay.
Okay, great. All right, thanks. Anyway, it's distracting for me.
Yeah, it's okay. We go with it.
But the stages of faith are, that when you're motivated to question your faith and question your assumptions, if you're evolving in a healthy way, you will move to the next level of understanding. But many people don't. They just cling to the old level.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the more they cling to that and fight for that reality to still be true, the more pain they are in.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it seems like then people just stay stuck in that pain. And then, I know I've encountered people that then it's almost becomes like a badge of honor, right? And we get rewarded in the society of, the grieving whatever, the grieving mom, the grieving dad, the grieving whatever, a parent. And, being able to, I know you talk a lot about this in regular support groups, right? That they have a place, but in some ways they only take you so far. And what you're offering is a next step, so to speak, right?
It is a next step. And what I do say is, traditional grief counseling and the studies that are coming out now are pretty much showing that grief counseling doesn't really do much. What it does is it gives you someone to talk to and to tell your story, and it's very important to tell your story and to feel heard. Sure. Grief groups are very good for that, because you can now share your story and you're building community and being with other people who've been where you are. So that stuff is critically important. But most of those groups and that kind of counseling doesn't take you beyond that. And it's missing a really big piece. And I happen to think that the piece that's missing is the spiritual piece. Regardless of what somebody's religious beliefs are, they can always move forward spiritually, even within their own tradition. Mm-hmm. And there's also the other thing that's missing from those traditional formats of grief support is real inner work. And that can be body work, like grief yoga, which we have at the Afterlife Conference, to move pain. Because when you're in pain, you can literally feel it in your literal heart, in your real chest. Mm-hmm. And there's stuff you can do to loosen that up and move it forward. And we also use ritual. And if you look at any religious tradition anywhere in the history of humankind, you will see that there are rituals. And rituals symbolize rites of passage, passages from, adolescence, menopause, the cycles of nature, spring and summer and fall. The plants are coming, the animals are on the move, whatever. There's always rituals for that. And the grief rituals we have in our culture now are very limited because they were designed and prescribed by our religious institutions that are essentially Judeo-Christian. And for many of us, it's just not enough. I mean, how many times have you heard people say, oh, I went to my father's funeral and it didn't help me. It was not meaningful. You know, the priest or the rabbi said blah, 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 and read some scripture, and it didn't mean anything. I mean, I hear that all the time. So we try to teach how to create new rituals, and we use a lot of shamanism in that. And the grief workshop is a whole day of ceremony that symbolically moves our pain from point A to point B throughout the day.
Great, great. Yeah, I think that, those that are listening in, please type in what's coming up for you. What are you hearing? What questions and comments that you have? Terri is sharing a wealth of information and just being able to have this conversation. So what's coming up for you? Because I imagine a number of people, if moving through grief, have been down the traditional route. And what does the inner work mean to you guys? And, what does conscious grieving mean? And how is this landing for people? So we'd love for people to just type in and let us know where you are with all of this right now. And again, it's your way to ask some questions too, because some of this may be new to a lot of you. So I see that Lauren has typed in something. Terri and Kim, I agree with you regarding power of ritual. Recently, my daughter lost 2 dogs, one at her dad's house and one at our house. The dog at her dad's sort of vanished, was given away without her being told it was going to happen, and the one at their house died. And we did a whole ritual around her death. Wow. The power of that with kids.
I assume that was a young kid.
Yes. Yeah. I know Lauren, our daughter's 10.
Yeah. And you know what? They're never too young to start understanding this. And so let's just sort of bounce off of that idea for a minute about young children. So many of us, when we were young, we were sent to Sunday school and church and whatever, and we were given all these rituals. But I think as we grew up, they lost their meaning for us because they don't really seem practical. So if you're going to give your child a religious education of some kind, be sure to include rituals that are easy to do and easy to keep up and really have meaning. So, you bury the dog in the backyard. That's really beautiful. You put some little stones on the grave in the shape of a heart, or you have the dog's ashes, and every year on the anniversary of the dog's death, you plant some flowers on the grave. There's just endless amounts of things you can do. And you don't want to let those rituals fall away. In many cultures, they have altars in their house for many things, and they have an ancestor altar, and sometimes they'll have the ashes of the ancestors or sacred objects. They'll put flowers and food and things, and they just keep that going forever. I have an altar in my house, that for my son and for my dog. And, it's a very active part of my life. On anniversaries of deaths, I light a candle there. Sometimes I'll just sit and meditate there and get in touch with their spirit. So, yes, rituals are really important. And for your little daughter, if she's in a lot of pain about this, which I'm sure she is, you could also have her do, and I love the idea of a child's version of this, something we do in the workshop, which is to draw a picture. We do something called draw a picture of your grief journey. So for a child, she could draw a picture of her dog or herself with tears or whatever a child would draw. And you put that picture on a little table and you light a candle. And you spend some time maybe crying or meditating on that picture. And then you pick up the picture. I'm visualizing how to do this with a 10-year-old. And you take it to another table. And on that table, you have some rose petals and a bowl. And you have a little pitcher full of water, and you pour it into the bowl with the rose petals. And you say, this water symbolizes my pain transforming, moving through me, going into the rose petals, which means growth and new life. And then you take the bowl with the rose petals and the water, and you go outside and you put it in the garden so that it feeds the earth and feeds new life. And you take your little picture that you drew and you burn it and bury it in the dirt. And you've moved that whole process to another phase. That would be really helpful for a 10-year-old.
That sounds
Sounds
wonderful.
wonderful.
You know, and I think it's so important, the physical movement, you know, of one place to another, you know, of taking the picture, moving it to the table, having the rose petals, going outside, pouring, as opposed to just kind of in our heads, you know, being able to sit with it. It's important because it's energy, right? It's energy, emotion. And so we need to move the energy.
Right. And we get stuck because literally the energy is stuck. And so what ritual does, this is how I always like to say it, it gives form to the formless. Your pain is formless. Love is formless. So how do we symbolize love? We symbolize it with Valentine hearts and wedding rings and all these things that symbolize romantic love. And we can use things to symbolize sadness and healing and growth and pain and spirituality and everything. So we just don't do enough of it. And it really, really makes a difference. I mean, a real simple ritual when you're sad or angry is to just light a candle. And as the heat and smoke rise up to the heavens, not that heaven is above us, but it's just a figure of speech, to the heavens, with that rising also goes your consciousness. And so you say, I release my fear and anger into the light. I release my sadness into the light. Up and away it goes with the heat and the smoke from the candle flame. You do that for 5 minutes, and then you blow out the candle and go on about your day. And the energy has shifted.
Energy has shifted, absolutely. Yeah, I have an altar to my grandmother who I was very close with. You know, she died 22 years ago, and you know, just being able to be present there and just have a ritual with that, it shifts the energy, and it's amazing. I see that Lauren said thank you. She said a grief journey. She said love that. Thank you for the idea. Dorothy says thank you, Terri, for sharing that with us. So great, people are getting some good ideas. So
yeah, you just gave me an idea too, is to do my grief workshop for children. I never even thought about doing that. I'm going to write myself a note right now to start thinking about that.
Good for you. Good for you. Great. We'll continue, folks, to type into the chat and, you know, questions, comments. We're here for you today. And like I said, Terri has tremendous amount of information to share. And maybe Terri will, you know, it's about 30 minutes into it. Let's shift gears a little bit and focus on kind of, so once people have done, let me put the camera back on me. So once people kind of have moved through a little bit in terms of letting go of limiting beliefs and opening up more spiritually, kind of what's the next step in terms of the conduits to other dimensions?
Well, we always have an open conduit to other dimensions. That never goes away. But because of many things, not the least of which is we're in a body, and so we're in this physical, dense wrapper that kind of cuts the conduit off a little bit. And then we have our cultural and religious conditioning that tells us we're not supposed to talk to other beings. So all those things really shut that conduit down. What we find a lot is when we're in deep grief, it opens because the heart is open, because that wound that you have in your heart is an opening. If you can see it that way, it's not a wound, it's an opening. And that conduit opens up for people a lot, where you hear many, many people getting messages from their loved ones on the other side. And then you also hear people saying, oh, I never get any messages. I never hear from my dead person. I just always want to get a message, but I never hear from him. But I do see him in dreams. And his favorite bird was a bluebird, and there's a bluebird that's been coming to my house every day, but I never get any messages from him. So in fact, there's something you can find if you go to the Afterlife Conference website, and on the far right-hand tab, I can't see it right now, but it says Afterlife Wisdom, I think. There's something called 10 Tips for Talking to the Other Side. And it's a little 10-point exercise that you can do to open a conduit to, you know, get your own interdimensional communication going. There is a lot of people to talk to out there. You know, there's your dead people. We call them dead people. Just because it's easier than saying there's your loved ones on the other side every time we want to say that. There are guides and ancestors and angelic beings. There's all kinds of stuff. That conduit is supposed to be open. We did not come here to Earth from Source to be cut off and left alone. Mm-hmm. And if you study the history of religions, every religion has some sense that there's mother, father, creator, whatever language they use, that there's something that is like our creator or our parent or our home or our true self or our original source. And there is, because when we're incarnated, we are a spark of that source, but we're somewhat cut off by being physical. So the whole spiritual quest is about remembering that original connection and going back to it. And once you work on that, you can receive messages and guidance from the divine. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Great. Just so you know, and so people can see, I put in the afterlifeconference.com website so people can start to begin to check that out. And as Terri was saying, there's the 10 tips on communicating. So talk a little bit, Terri, about after Danny died. You said within 30 minutes after he died, you were communicating with him.
Yes. Well, during the last few years of his life, he lost the ability to talk as part of his progression of his disease. And during those years, I was reading tarot cards at a metaphysical bookstore. I've been doing and teaching tarot for 30 years. And I had a way of doing tarot, which was kind of Jungian archetypal interpretation. Anyway, one of the channelers at the bookstore came up to me and said, well, you're channeling while you do this. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm not a channeler. And she said, yes, everybody's a channeler. So she sort of became my teacher and taught me how to listen to my instincts. So I would look at a card and I would just get a feeling from it. And she taught me how to not analyze, but to just listen to that feeling and follow it. So my intuitive abilities really increased at that time, while Danny's speaking ability was decreasing. So it was kind of going like this, and we started to meet in the middle and kind of began to communicate more telepathically. And I realized later it was in preparation for communicating with him after he died. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I also had another teacher who was a channeler who would give me a lot of guidance and would say, she would channel these messages about my purpose with Danny and all of this. And she would say, he's going to stay very close to you after he died. So I had that in my mind. But I never thought it would be like it was. I mean, 30 minutes after he died, I was lying on the bed with him, holding his body, and I was saying, where are you? Can you show me a picture of where you are? And instantly, I got the most amazing picture that I couldn't have made up in a million years. He was standing in about 2 inches of water, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. He looked like James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. And he was kicking his legs up. And then he was doing all these things, and he kept giving me all these images of circuses and all this stuff. And he said, write this all down. Go to your computer right now and write this down. So I started writing it all down. Well, throughout the day, things would happen. Like my friend Melissa would call me, and she'd say, my uncle, who was a circus performer, just died like 5 minutes ago. And it was like, oh, that's why Danny was sending me circus pictures. Because circus didn't mean anything to us. He'd never even been to a circus. So all these little things were starting to prove themselves to be fitting. That's how it started. And that's how he started talking to me. And it was like that all the time, day after day. It was just endless. I mean, my first book, A Swan in Heaven, was basically dictated by him, as was the second book. So that's how this all started. And now it's been 9 years. He's not as close to me as he was. He's more in the background, but I feel like he's still like the mama bird pushing me out of the nest to keep out in the world doing what I'm doing. Great. Because I can't believe I do what I do. I don't even know how this happened.
Yeah. As you said earlier, you wouldn't believe that you would be doing what you're doing, going to school and doing this work. And one of the things that have come from this too, in addition to the books you've written and the conscious grieving work, is the Afterlife Conference. So tell us, how did that get started?
So the Afterlife Conference um, was born out of conflict, as so many things are.
Uh-huh.
There is a group that it is a national group that caters to bereaved parents. They have a big conference every year, and they happened to be in my town in 2009, I guess, maybe 2010. And I wanted to be a speaker there, and I wanted to talk about my son and this after-death communication. It was just for bereaved parents. And I sent them a proposal, and they very rudely rejected me. And they said,
Mm.
we absolutely do not allow this kind of talk at our conference, talking about after-death communication. It makes people uncomfortable. We don't allow religion. That's religious. I mean, it was just ridiculous.
Mm.
And I did a little research, and I found out that they had rejected many of the well-known authors and speakers in this field, including Bill Guggenheim, who wrote Hello from Heaven, Sandy Goodman, who wrote Love Never Dies. These were well-known authors who were talking about after-death communication, all of whom who wanted to speak at this conference and were rejected. So what did I do? I said, I'm going to start my own conference. I'm going to create a place where we can talk about this. And that was in 2010. The first conference was 2011. And it's been going strong ever since. And interestingly, after our conference started, a bunch of other afterlife conferences popped up on the scene,
Ah, interesting.
which is great. I mean, you want to spread it around as much as you can. So that's how it happened. And we got very popular very fast. And we had the absolute top leaders in the field of afterlife research with us year after year. Raymond Moody, Eben Alexander, Stuart Hameroff, long, long list. You can see on our website, afterlifeconference.com. There's a page there about past conferences, which will show you all the people that we've had over
Mm.
the years.
Great. So this is their sixth one coming up now?
Sixth one coming
Sixth
up
one.
in St. Louis. We
Yep.
move it to a different city every year so that it's easier for people to get to, because if we had it in Portland, where I live, the people from Florida wouldn't be able to get there very easily. So we move it around. It's a movable feast. And
Great.
we're in St. Louis this year. We'll be in Portland in 2017.
Great.
And this year we have one of my favorite people in the world as a keynote, who is Bishop John Shelby Spong. And people either really, really know about him or really, really don't. But he is a retired Episcopal bishop who was the first person in the world of religion to speak out against fundamentalism, about biblical literacy. He opened the door for the ordination of openly gay priests and female priests in the
Mm.
Episcopal Church. And he is a absolute hardcore radical who talks about how hell doesn't really exist. It's just a creation of the church. He's absolutely brilliant. So I'm so happy that we have him. And for any of our hospice workers out there that are listening, we have Gary Malkin, who composed the music for Graceful Passages, which is a CD package that's used in hospice. And all kinds of fabulous people. We have
Great.
shamans and mediums and scientists and hospice doctors.
It's great.
So check it out, afterlifeconference.com.
Yes, and I put a sticky in the or a note in the chat also. Yeah, I've been for those of you that are interested, I've been following Terry for a number of years, and I loved when I first saw the Afterlife Conference being, promoted, where scientists and shamans come together, and I thought, wow, that was just so intriguing because a lot of times it's either
mainstream in there without giving up the woo-woo.
Yeah, yeah. That sounds fantastic. Wow. Yeah, and I mean, some of those speakers are just phenomenal, and I love, the MD and the shaman together, and then being able to have shamanic practices. I mean, that was some of the teachings that I had, and it was kind of, what did we call it? Kind of shamanic work with death and dying. And so literally we did some rituals of literally lifting the energy body and then allowing it to, we got to experience what that was.
Oh, you're talking about what you did at the Four Winds? You went to Four Winds, right?
I didn't know. I studied with Jose Luis Herrera. I didn't study with Alberto, but yeah, we did that. And one of my teachers, we actually had that opportunity to be able to experience that. So yeah, it's
amazing. You did the death spiral, right? The great death spiral.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And Kitty Edwards is going to be teaching that at our conference. She actually teaches us how to do that. And you probably did the practice where you did the death enactment.
Yes.
That is the most powerful process in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. It was phenomenal. So,
and I think hospices should teach that. I think that hospices should bring teachers in to instruct the nurses and the volunteers how to do that.
Absolutely. Someday. Well, we continue to have things like the Afterlife Conference where more and more people get exposed. I think that, soon it will become kind of practice. So.
And so one last thing we said we were going to talk about is we wanted to talk about this rest in peace thing.
Yes.
So some of you listeners may be in my Facebook group. I have an Afterlife Awareness Facebook group. And I posted something recently about a good friend who happens to be a medium, or a medium who happens to be a good friend, who died very unexpectedly. And all these people are posting, oh, he was such a great guy, I knew him, and all this. And so many of them are saying, rest in peace, rest in peace, rest in peace. So I began to wonder what people really think they are saying when they are saying rest in peace, because these are people who believe in an afterlife, in a very active afterlife. So why are they still saying rest in peace? Mm-hmm. So I started another string on the Facebook page, a discussion about that. So if you're on our Facebook group, go take a look at it. Even if you're not, you can see it. It's Afterlife Awareness on Facebook. And we're having this great discussion about where did the origin of rest in peace come from? It actually was religious, and it originated with, and if you are a saved Christian, in your death, you are protected by the peace of the church. That's where it came from. Of course, everybody just uses it. And there's this imagery, like it became popular because people think a dead person looks like they're sleeping, which they really don't look like at all.
Right. No.
And so it just became something in the popular culture. And as people were posting in the string, they were saying, well, I say it all the time, but I don't really believe in it. I don't really mean it. I just say it because I think it'll make the other person comfortable. So the conversation is about what can we say instead? And, our culture has not sanctioned any alternative language. So what I suggest is, instead of addressing the condition of the dead person, whether he's resting or flying or in peace or whatever, let's just focus on the condition of the living person if we don't want to offend anyone. So it's very simple, just saying, I'm so sorry for your pain. How can I help you? That's really all you need to say. You don't need to say what you think is happening with the dead person if you're not sure how the other person believes. But there are also other things you can say. Fly home in love. Blessings on your journey. How could that be offensive to anybody? I mean, right. So I would like to see that expression, rest in peace, just disappear completely from the culture, because it perpetrates these false notions we have about death, that we follow along with what the body does. A body only needs to rest when it's alive.
Right. That's so true. That's so true. I mean, because we know that our energy body or soul, whatever you want to call it on the other side, is not resting. We're continuing our work.
Yes. And not only that, another thing I said in that string is the physical body is also not resting because it's decomposing, and decomposition is a very active process.
Active. Yeah.
I mean, it has to decompose all the way down to the bones.
Right.
that takes, I don't know, thousands of years. So the body's actually doing something too. There's just no rest
There's no rest.
going on anywhere in
That's
the universe.
that's
Everything's always moving and always happening.
that's so perfect. Yeah, because but people don't think about that, right? That the body decomposes, and that's an active phase. It's not about just laying there in the ground or wherever we are. Yeah.
Yeah. People, and key word, people don't think about it. People don't think
That's right.
about
That's right.
how much they aren't really facing death in
Mhm.
the language that they
Mhm.
use.
Yeah, and I think you said it. It just perpetuates kind of
Hmm.
the unconsciousness of folks.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so folks go and, listeners go to, the Facebook page, the Afterlife Awareness page, and lots of
Get
stuff
in.
there, but there's a great thread about this, rest and peace, that we just say.
And there's tons of great threads. I mean, scroll through all the stuff. It's a really fun group. We have 12,000 members,
Yeah.
but only as in any group, 20% of the members do 80% of the work. So only about 20% of them actually ever post. But we have a really good time. I mean, we have deep, deep, wonderful conversations.
Yeah, it's great. I'd encourage people to go there, so great. Well, Terri, as we're approaching the top of the hour, even for our little hiccup, we still got a number of viewers back on. So this is great. And hopefully the replay will be, clean, or if not, just a short little gap and people will stick with it. So before we kind of close up, is there parting words, anything you want to kind of leave the listeners with today before we wrap up and talk about what's coming up next?
All I would say is in keeping with what we're saying about energy continuing, there is no death. It's like walking from the living room to the bedroom. It's
Mm,
just walking through another door. And the more we can open ourselves up to the fact that there are other dimensions accessible to us, the more at peace we'll be with death and with life.
great. Such powerful words. Okay. Well, again, thank you, Terri. This has just been so wonderful. We could spend hours talking about all of these pieces, and depending on how the replay looks, or even not, the energy here and the engagement, I think, and we'll see. People will get the replay. So certainly, if you have questions and comments afterwards, send them in, and make sure that Terri gets them, and we may have to have her back on again. So thank you, Terri. So
Okay, thank you.
yes. And so, as Terri mentioned earlier, those of you that are still here with us, she's going to be on the radio tonight and also tomorrow. She'll be on Spirit Seeker Radio tonight and on Good Grief Radio tomorrow. And so, Terri, people can find more information about you at
Well,
www.danieldirect.net.
danieldirect.net is my personal website. And then, of course, there's the Afterlife Conference, afterlifeconference.com. And the grief workshop is consciousgrieving.org.
Great. And I'll make sure that in the email with the replay that all of those are listed. So
Oh,
people,
great. Thank you.
great. So, and yes, folks, please take a look at the afterlifeconference.com page with May 12th through the 15th. And as I said, Terri, when you dropped off, if I wasn't going to be in the middle of boxes and moving in May, I would be there, but I can assure you I'll be there in Portland in 2017 because this is important to me. So
Yay, thank
again,
you.
that's great. So, in just kind of what's happening with me, tomorrow night, I'll be co hosting another episode of the Dying to Talk Cafe with my co host, Michael Bloom. And we will be talking with Christine McMichael, who's the executive director of the Massachusetts Hospice and Palliative Care Federation. And we'll be talking about all things hospice and especially the myths around hospice. So, join us tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, and you can go to dyingtotalkcafe.net to register. And on Friday, for those of you in Massachusetts, I'll be presenting again at the LGBT Elder Care Conference up in Salem State University with their social work program and local elder care and LGBT service provider. So that will be fun, talking about authoring your final chapter and the importance of advanced care planning in the LGBT community. And then next month, my guest will be Rachel Zeldin from I'm Sorry to Hear. She'll be joining us in the Vital Conversations to talk about, I consider Rachel like the walking consumer report for funerals and the funeral home industry. So she'll be sharing lots of information with us about that and dialoguing about ways to be a consumer, a consumer that really is informed about funerals and funeral homes. So that's kind of what's happening. So again, thank you so much to Terri, and we look forward. Thank you for everyone that stuck with us, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.